Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Is it working? Hello, I'm Katie Poole, and I am co-chair of Open Book, and that's where you are, here at Open Book. The Open Book program is presented by the Pasadena Literary Alliance, and first things first, since we're being recorded, would you maybe turn your phones on silent? If you didn't check them, so that'd be great, thank you. So I just want to give you a couple minutes of introduction, and then we'll start our program. And we will get to your questions at the end of the program. So collect your thoughts. The Pasadena Literary Alliance mission is to do three things: celebrate authors, encourage dialogue about the literary arts, which is what we're doing while we're getting our drinks, and raising money. So we raise money for literary programs in the San Gabriel Valley, and at this point we are at over $500,000 returned to the community for different types of literary programs. So thank you. We have a website, and listed on the website are three things. Well, a lot of stuff, but three things I want you to know about. All of our programs are videoed, and they're available for free. So if you have friends that are interested, you can send the video over, and it's on the website. We have on that same website opportunities to donate. So if you are a guest and you haven't had a chance to donate, you can do that on the website. We also have volunteering information. If you're interested in volunteering, we love volunteers, so just tap a volunteer on the shoulder and ask her what she does. We'd love to have more volunteers all the time. And I want to mention that this year we added a new grantee, the Altadena Library, where we are. And so I just want to introduce you to Nikki, who is here in the back. Nikki Winslow is the library district director. She's standing here in the back, and I thought maybe we could just get a couple of words.
Yeah, I was just saying, Katie and I met, I think in November before the pandemic, and we built a really solid partnership ever since. Thank you to the Literary Alliance for the grant funds that you gave us, that we can have more programs just like this at the Altadena Library District and our three sites. So thank you for being here.
So usually at this moment in the program, I talk about our sponsors, our commercial sponsors, but the theme of this program tonight just didn't really fit with that, and I wanted to tell you instead about three nonprofits that are talented at combining climate action with story. Putting those two together is not easy. And so there's three that I wanted to mention, and they just went up there. They were there. But anyway, I'll just tell you about them. So the first one is Earthshot, and represented tonight by Bob Wyman, who is right here raising his hand. So Earthshot is a content company. They're producing animated material and comic books. Also, focused on stories inspiring the next generation to combat climate change. Not an easy task. And secondly, I want to mention the Arroyos and Foothills Conservancy. There are flyers for the Conservancy on the table out here. Also, Earthshot flyers are on the table. The thing about the Conservancy website is that they pick special animals and tell you the story of those animals and how they make it through the corridors of our neighborhoods. And that combination is really appealing. And if you have questions about the Conservancy, I'm also available to answer questions about that. Okay, and then the third one is the Altadena Seed Library. And I believe Nina is right here, and she's going to stand up and give us a wave. So Nina Raj is the founder of the Altadena Seed Library, and the Seed Library provides a network of seed exchange boxes telling the story of the role of native plants for this community as they rebuild. So really heartfelt work. So after our discussion tonight, you just may feel the need to reach out to a community of like-minded people, and I suggest you consider one of those three nonprofits. So let me briefly introduce our celebrated authors. Carribean Fragoza is a journalist and writer who grew up in South El Monte and graduated from UCLA, where she majored in comparative literature. She went on to graduate from the California Institute of the Arts with an MFA in fiction and is currently a professor in the Cal Arts MFA Creative Writing program. In 2023, she received a Whiting Award for her short story collection, Eat the Mouth That Feeds You. The quote in the Kirkus Review that I like, quote, "This collection of visceral, often bone-chilling stories centers the liminal world of Latinos in Southern California while fraying reality at its edges." So pretty spooky. But then one online review also included a song playlist for Eat the Mouth That Feeds You, which is the music that we were listening to in the reception time. So very fun playlist, you'll find it. But not stopping, in 2024, Fragoza, always in search of the spirit of a place, edited a book of 25 up-and-coming Californians entitled Writing the Golden State, the New Literary Terrain of California. And thank you to Romans for funding and bringing both of those books in the back there, so they're available. Ben Ehrenreich. Ben Ehrenreich's most recent book, Desert Notebooks, A Roadmap for the End of Time, was the winner of a 2021 American Book Award. His previous book of nonfiction, The Way to the Spring, Life and Death in Palestine, based on years of reporting from the West Bank, was published in 2016 and selected as one of the best books of the year by both The Guardian and The Economist. Ehrenreich's essays and brave, place-anchored journalism have appeared in Harper's as recently as this March, the New York Times Magazine, the London Review of Books, and many others. Ehrenreich has reported from every troubled corner of the world, including Los Angeles. And he told me he considers himself to be from LA, although then I found out he lives in Spain. So that's more to learn there. Importantly, Ehrenreich, and this is important for tonight, is also the author of two novels, Ether in 2011 and The Suitors in 2006. A word about Desert Notebooks. The LA Times called the book a hybrid memoir, travelogue, and metaphysical inquiry. So you tried to put all that into one book. Equally fraught and hopeful, the book skillfully layers climate science, mythology, nature writing, and personal journaling all together in one book. Both of these authors move fluidly between genres. Last week, when I asked them what possibly could give structure to their busy days, the answer from both was, my children. Open Book Special Sauce is bringing together the authors we want to hear talk to each other. And so with that, I'm now handing the program over to Ben and Carribean. So you can pick those mics up or
Can you hear us without them?
they're on.
They're on. Can you hear us in the back?
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe we don't need them. Yeah?
They need them for the recording.
Well, for the recording.
Because the things are.
Thank you, Katie, for that wonderful introduction. Thank you for bringing me home. I'm not from LA. I can't say I'm from LA, but I spent more of my adult life here than anywhere else, and it's still home no matter where I am. And it's been painful this last year to watch what LA has been suffering, and really good to be here. thank you all for being here, both the people I know and love and the people I've never seen before. And I think we're going to start, Carribean was going to read
Can
something.
you put the mic a little closer? We really can't hear you.
Sure. Carribean is going to read a little bit, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, hi. I'm gonna connect to this mic. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
That's good. All right. Right there. Yeah, okay. Yeah. I am also very happy to be here. I'm from the San Gabriel Valley, born and raised here. I'm from South El Monte, not too far, and I feel a strong kinship with all people of the San Gabriel Valley, and so it feels very special to be here in Altadena, especially after the fires, and it's been very impactful to see how the landscape has changed, and there's much to say there, but I just wanted to acknowledge what has been experienced here, and that I have felt it very closely in my being. But with that said, I also have a lot of joy, again, also seeing people that I hadn't seen in a long, long time, and getting to know some new people as well. So yes, we are going to have a conversation, but I think we're going to mix it up a little bit, and we're going to read just a little tiny snippet from our books. I'm going to read a little tiny bit from a slightly spooky story. Maybe it's more spooky than that, but it's from my collection, Eat the Mouth That Feeds You, and it's from a story called New Fire Songs, and I'll just jump right into it and say a few words. Before the walnut grove, many of us had started at the vineyards. Green globes of grapes nestled among heavy garlands of leaves, patiently growing fat, turning the color of blood on their vines. Some of our elders still know the stories about when the vines were once but tender, crushable things strung over a few sticks and wire. Now the vines were woody and thick, like trunks of trees. The elders never wondered what would have happened if we had crushed the farmers' vines, snapped the necks of their saplings while we still could. There probably wouldn't be a walnut grove, at least not for us, we figured. So where would we be now? Where would the farmers be? These days we wondered mostly among ourselves. The elders would not speak of it. They kept the fire and fanned away our questions with thick coils of smoke, sucking on their toothless gums. But we, the young ones, whispered these questions among ourselves as we stabbed the black earth with twigs and watched the farmers go about their routine days. We've learned to memorize every one of their movements, as regular as the sun. They are as bound to its rhythms, to the will of the earth as we are. It's the one thing we have always shared in common. From a distance, we can see that in this way, we are quite the same. From the shelter of the grove, we see how vulnerable they are, but also how great is their hatred for us. From our youngest days as babies, our mothers sang rhymes about the farmers to us. They taught us to carefully mind the farmer at every instant, as it is essential to always know where they are and what they're doing. We sang these songs to ourselves as young children playing in the dirt. We sang the grape songs, and we sang walnut songs. We even sang cotton songs, because we all came from different farms before the grove, and from other places before that. The work songs are very old, of course, and we no longer know what it's like to work in the fields like that, crouching over the crop, crouching under the sun, bowing under the duster as it flies overhead, working until you raise your face to the uninterrupted sky to steal a final breath. Those days are over. Now we, the younger ones, try to make up new songs, but all we have are strange, wordless songs that we beat out of the ground with sticks, with our feet and our fists. So I'll pause there. and just say a few words, and then I'll turn it over to Ben. Just a little context of the story. I wrote this story during the first Trump presidency, and I wrote it when I was living in Fresno. And the reason I really wanted to read that excerpt is because I feel like it really connects a lot of the themes that we're going to be touching on tonight, and that I've been thinking about as I was revisiting Ben's book, and they have to do with relationship to the land. It was the first time that I had lived in a place outside of the San Gabriel Valley where people had such a direct connection to the land. They literally lived as workers of the land and relied on the land for their subsistence. And also it was a time, this was during those years, that feels very familiar today, where the immigration rates were picking up steam, and there was a lot of fear in the Central Valley. And so it was the first time that I had personally, even though I grew up in the 80s and 90s and there were immigration rates then, as a child I was not aware, as I am now as an adult, just the fear that these raids inflict on families. And so there's echoes to what is being experienced today and what has been experienced for months now here in Los Angeles. And so, and then there's other things to be said about language and the need to reinvent language, at least by some of these characters in my stories. Like, where does language and storytelling fail us? And when do we need to find new stories to tell and new ways to tell it? So, yeah, there's a lot of like material in there that we can parse out, and I feel like some of that is in conversation, at least a little bit, with Ben's Desert Notebooks.
Can I start by asking you a question about it?
Sure.
Okay. You should all read this story if you haven't, but it's a really chilling and beautiful story with this sort of almost eternal conflict between the people who live in the Walnut Grave and the farmers, which felt very much like of the moment in Trump 1, I'm sure, and feels even more so now, because in the story the farmers are learning to use fire, basically to burn out the dwellers of the Walnut Grove, even though it means that it will burn them too. And it, I'm not giving anything away probably, and ends with this conflagration, but it also ends on this like really, in the last sentence, this like very surprisingly hopeful note.
Right.
I wonder if you could talk like both about you know, how that is resonating now as we're sort of repeating in this awful spiral those crises, but also like if you could sort of talk us through those last couple sentences and
Yeah, there is often a hopeful note in a lot of my stories, even though there's a lot of decay and death, and and they are spooky, but there's often at least an undercurrent, if not a straight, like direct sense of hope that I like to leave off on. And I think this comes from like my experience in living through many moments throughout my life where it feels like, well, that's the end of that, and that's the end of an era, and that's the end of, I mean, even today, I mean, there's a lot of talk of, there's different ways to talk about the current moment that we're in, but the word apocalypse gets like tossed around a lot. And I'm careful with that word, and we could talk about that too, because I have children, and I don't know that children want to hear or benefit from hearing adults like, you know, cry about apocalypse. Like, what does that mean to them? What is that way to grow up? But for me, I think I get like a weird like high, like an exhilaration in seeing systems that have been oppressive crash down or fail or burn down. And that sounds like maybe scary and anarchist to people sometimes, because that means letting go of life and society and structures of society that give us stability and do provide opportunities for people to thrive. But then also for me, I feel like I can see that they're also really oppressive. And so when I see opportunities to break out of these systems and to reimagine something new, that's where I get like really excited. Like, yes, let's imagine something new, because this isn't working for many, many of us. And so I think there is hope in catastrophe, at least the way I see it or experience it.
Yeah, I guess it's worth, the word apocalypse comes from the Greek, which means like just an uncovering. Like it doesn't mean an end. I mean, we think of it that way, but it's a moment when everything is revealed. And we're certainly living through, I think, one of those. It is unfortunately much easier to see the contours of reality at the moment. And when I wrote this book, it was in another one of those moments. We seem to be having a lot of those moments. And I was trying to figure out, I think the same thing that I'm still trying to figure out in my writing, which is how do we get here to this moment of of profound crisis, not just a political, social crisis, but a ecological crisis that is no joke, which you don't have to drive very far in Altadena to understand. The question I was trying to ask in this book was, humans have, and in the book I'm writing now, humans have been on this planet for hundreds of thousands of years, and have lived in many different formations and lived in many different relations to one another and other people and other animals and to the earth itself. And many of those societies have made some mistakes and have outrun their resources in one way or another. But no one has done what we've done. That no one has driven so many species to extinction in such a short time. No one has altered to the degree that modern industrial civilization has the temperature of the planet to the degree that we are, and this has happened in like a blink of time. Since the steam engine, at the turn of the 18th and 19th century, like 200 years. This is like absolutely nothing. This is an eyelash. So how did this happen? Like what happened? And at the same time, I was trying to understand like what is time exactly? Because this was written during the early Trump years, when on the one hand you had this like acceleration of crisis, which is part of the game that Trump plays, right? That like there's something new and crazy and wacky and really bad happening every day, and you're like what, and time doesn't see it move kind of smoothly forward. It sort of like does this crazy jerky roller coaster thing, which is really exhausting if you have any kind of relationship with your cell phone. And on the other hand, it was a time, and one that we're living in still, in which the ghosts that we like to imagine had been laid to rest were all popping up. There was like a, and I think still we're in this sort of like a haunted house in which the corpses are like popping up out of the coffins and saying, ah, I mean, didn't Pete Hegseth a couple weeks ago pardoned the soldiers who were recognized with medals of honor after Wounded Knee. I read about Wounded Knee a bit in the book. Who's been asking for this? Like suddenly this was important to bring these genocidaires the honors that they deserve. But in every way, all of these sort of ghosts of progress, if you will, that were supposed to be dead and gone, keep popping up. Like, hey, fascism's back. Hey, Nazism's cool again. Hey, like women really should have no control over their bodies whatsoever, and that's going to be the new way. And we're going to get rid of all the people who aren't white and put them in camps. And I could go on. I'm going to read a little tiny bit. Think of it this way. Hundreds of millions of years ago, our distant cousins, various phytoplankton and zooplankton, cycads and ferns, lived lives as full of passion and drama as any, and then went ahead and died. Buried in mud or water and deprived of oxygen, they were compressed over the centuries by layer after layer of sediment and stone. Slowly, pressure and heat transformed them into a black and viscous goo, into gas that stinks of flatulence, and into strange, hard, oily lumps. Cut to the early 19th century when British industrialists found a use for these otherwise unpleasant substances, the transformed bodies of the Earth's early dead. They burned them and made things move, and turned that motion into money, which could be turned into more money to mine more ancient fuels from the earth and make more things move and make more money. The carbon that had for millennia slept beneath the planet's crust in vast and oozy subterranean cemeteries was suddenly spat into the air through smokestacks, chimneys, exhaust pipes. It stayed up there and commenced absorbing more and more of the radiant heat of the sun, causing the earth to precipitously warm, the ice at its poles to melt, its oceans to rise, their currents to shift. You are no doubt by now familiar with this process. What is it really, though, but a haunting? The ancient dead disturbed from slumber, punishing us for our greed and blindness, our restless lack of reverence. What is it but the past come back, and time unhinged, collapsing?
Yeah, I'm thinking, as you're reading about haunting, thinking about a lot of things. I'm still thinking about the apocalypse, and maybe I could start there, and then we can talk again about haunting. But just to try to turn the question back on you a little bit about apocalypse, I guess I'm curious to know, since you shared that definition of apocalypse as a kind of uncovering, is that how you think of this moment, or when we're thinking about like this new moment that we're experiencing in the climate crisis? Do you think of this moment as a kind of uncovering, or do you think of apocalypse in a different way currently?
Yeah, I mean, I think of it as an uncovering in which I think some of the less obvious dynamics that rule our societies are suddenly a lot clearer, such as that, like, the billionaires don't care if we all die and the planet burns to crisp. like that's quite clear. Such as that our government also doesn't care if most of us die. I mean, I could go on. I think there are a lot of dynamics that are really obvious to a lot of people. And I think that clarification is helpful. But I think I do also think of it in terms of an end. I think there are certain. I would to be if I'm feeling optimistic, I would like to think that a certain way of relating to the earth is coming to an end. But I know that's not true, because there are so many people who are invested in continuing it. But I think, like, as this sort of uncovering happens, and as like dynamics are become undeniable, the illusions that sustain them are disappearing. And those illusions were not just those illusions like fulfilled important functions. And I think like one of the really scary things that's happened since Trump's first administration is a lot of the illusions about how good we are as a society, and how much we all care about each other, and how much we've overcome certain kinds of really brutal hatred. Those have disappeared, and as soon as those illusions disappeared, it became okay again to be open and out front with a certain kind of violence that in previous administrations was hidden. So yeah, I think it's the one thing it isn't is the end of the world. I mean that that worlds continue, and new songs will be found. We don't know what those worlds will look like, and we don't know who's going to be part of them.
Yeah, I think I find a tiny bit of solace in thinking about how the world will continue, how maybe other algae or fungi will benefit from our end. And I love fungi and algae, and a lot of people do, and like I love nature, and I'm glad for all of the living creatures that will thrive past us. But I'm also scared, you know, I also get scared. And I was thinking, just gonna go on all the different tangents, but I mean, when COVID started, I thought this is a moment, and it was clearly, not that we in the world haven't experienced plagues of immense proportions before, but in our lifetime, definitely in our century. And I thought, I'm gonna make it. I'm gonna pull through this. Like, I don't know what this thing is, but somehow I was like committed to surviving. We're gonna do this. And it wasn't until I saw the a red sky of the fires in the middle of the pandemic. That's when we started having like just more fires in my memory, and the sky was red in the middle of the day. That's when I thought, oh shit, I am not surviving. Whatever this is, like I'm not gonna make it through. Or just experiencing extreme heat with no air conditioning, it just feels like I'm not gonna make it through. But just to return to this idea of haunting and how we're haunted by the past. And one of the things that I was really captivated with in your book was the way you really uncover the illusions of time. And that's like such a big concept and it's so abstract, but you do a really great job of sort of helping us understand the mythologies that have shaped our notions of time and progress, and how those two things have become so part of each other. And we feel like we're always moving forward in time, and we're always progressing towards something. Everything is growing bigger and better, and we're more enlightened as we go, and we should know better. And then yet here we are again assessing this moment where, again, like our reproductive rights are being taken away from us, where it feels like, not just feels, but we know that a lot of actual rights are being torn away from us, and time is sort of moving backwards in some ways if we're thinking of time on a line. And I was just really like amazed that you were able to pull off this project of just blowing apart our notions of time, but then not just blowing it up, but bringing all the hauntings into it. And I think I have many questions about this, but how did you arrive to this like interrogation of time as something that felt really important to center in this project?
I mean, this book was a weird one to write because I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't have a plan, and it kind of took me. I mean, the book opens with the story of being in the desert and going for a walk with a couple friends through this wash. I was living in Joshua Tree at the time, and we saw these owls like jumping ahead, sort of like flying by ahead of us. And sort of swooping around and disappearing, and we kept walking, and you know, we went silent in like reverence and awe, and then every couple minutes we reached the part where the place that they had roosted, and they would again take flight and again swoop around and fly off into the distance, and this sort of kept happening over the course of I don't know how long, and it was absolutely stunning. And you know, I know and knew then rationally what was happening was that we were just scaring them every time we got a little bit further ahead. But it felt like they were sort of leading us on and on into the desert. And I sat down to write about this as a, like, you know, because it was profound and I wanted to remember it. And ended up writing for the next like 10 months, 12 months, basically. And researching and reading as I was going and writing as I was researching. And so I started like getting really interested in like the symbolism of owls which took me first through the Popol Vuh, the Mayan texts, and then through various other indigenous stories about owls that were local to the desert in Southern California, and then remembered, oh yeah, Hegel writes about owls. The owl of Minerva, flies only at dusk. And then started thinking about like what that meant for him, and started then thinking about, and he had this understanding of history as moving in this direction, as the sort of uncovering of God to himself, basically, of the spirit to itself. And as I started to look and think about this more, I really like these notions. For him, it was racially inflected. That where the spirit was going was towards what we would call progress, right? But all of the thinkers who first started to articulate this idea of progress in the 1700s understood it in terms of race, and understood it in terms of geography. That Europe was where the future was, and Africa was where the past was, and Asia was where the past was, and that progress as a historical vector meant moving towards sort of greater and greater whiteness and away from the primitiveness and savagery of these other people. So this, the way that we structure time, the way that we think about time in like a very deeply unconscious way that we're brought up, actually sort of contains these incredibly racist assumptions about the world within it. When you start considering that, and throw away this notion of progress as the kind of myth that it is, these hauntings don't seem particularly strange anymore, because time doesn't move like that, and it does actually circle around, and things haunting in circles and whatnot are actually a much more, I think, accurate and interesting way to think about the way existence unfurls. This was in some ways, I think the notion of an apocalypse, of an end to time, is sort of this fantasy of it's the like apocalyptic fantasies and have sort of coexisted with the notion of progress almost from the beginning. And this idea that this will all come to an end and collapse has sort of been the kind of the shadow of this path towards greater and greater whiteness and rationality that some of these thinkers in France and in Germany were enunciating. But I think once you get rid of this way of thinking about time, then change, and even catastrophic change, becomes a lot less scary, and even our own the lack of loss of our own existence becomes less scary, because we didn't exist before. We're not going to exist later, right? And many cultures have ways of understanding catastrophe in sort of in cyclical fashions, and which are able to kind of make sense of it and subsume it into how we understand the world. And actually, I saw, I don't know, it's one of your stories, the title story in your book, which actually had like this both like disquieting and kind of also wonderfully comforting image. Most of your stories have disquieting and comforting images, but it's a story. Maybe we can talk about the title story and how it ends. Like, again, I'm giving away all the ends.
Yeah, so Eat the Mouth That Feeds You is the story of, it's told in the voice of a mother who is being consumed, like literally eaten by her daughter. You could call it cannibalism. That's not how my characters think of what they're doing, but, and so through that process, she learns that what her daughter wants is to be reconnected with their family history, with their family lineage. And the daughter who's consuming the mother is through the process of eating the mother and then eventually eating objects, eating letters, drinking ink, eating her great-grandmother's lotions and perfumes, and she just becomes this kind of monster. But what's driving her is this like real craving to understand, to know. It's a hunger for knowledge, but a knowledge of the self through the generations that she was broken from. And so I think this is definitely, or can be, part of the immigrant experience, especially when we have the US-Mexico border dividing families. And it was the case for me that I lost touch with my grandmother and my great-grandmothers, and there was some communication and some visits, but really I lost out on a lot of knowledge about our family and really about myself, and that is a grief that cycles back. And I think grief is nonlinear. Grief is not something that you just sort of progress and graduate out of. Grief is something that comes back to you and haunts you. And sometimes grief can be for things you didn't even know you missed or didn't know that you lost along the way. And so that story is, in part, it's really driven by grief. And so one of the things that the mother learns as she's being consumed by the daughter is that she's going to also be reunited. They're trying to build a safe space for all of the women in the family where they can be together. And so that's also what the daughter is trying to do with her own body, and in consuming her mother and consuming her grandmother and great-grandmother, she's trying to create a house or like a home that can hold all of them together and where they can all be together finally. So again, there's this, yes, like perhaps like grotesque aspect of eating the body, and it gets a little graphic sometimes, but it's, I don't know, I think it's just, there's so many things about, I mean, eating itself, if you think about it, can be, anything can be grotesque, but it's really driven by this like yearning for connection, and then the haunting is constantly there, and yeah, like I'm always like balancing the scariness and the spookiness and the disquieting aspects with something more hopeful. And I felt that way in reading your book, where I was like, damn, like we're really not gonna make it. Like this is melting and that's burning and this is flooding. I mean, it's over for us. But then I think that in coming back to this like abstract like notion of time and the way you talk about it, I feel like you give us hope there. Like we don't have to like run the road off the cliff in that way. Like there's other routes that we can take if we just kind of stop in this moment and think about what are possibilities that we can consider or imagine together. And I guess I was hoping that you could talk a little bit more about hope, and I don't know how you were maybe handling or thinking about hope in your book.
I feel a little bit allergic to the word hope, because it seems like it's this sort of emotion. It's this emotion which is somehow separate, and it's going to sort of save you and pull you out of everything that's that we're suffering. But I think it's actually it's something that is, in my experience, is usually intimately and dialectically united with despair. But it's also something that is it's something that we make of despair, like together. Like it's an active thing. It's not like this like I watched this TV show and now I feel hope. It's you know, in my experience, hope is something that is built like by human bodies acting collectively, and you know, this is, I don't know if this comes out in the book that much, but I think like for me, the things that that save me from like feeling utter despair, which is very easy to do, are moments when I'm like out there with other people doing shit, and and finding that together we can build something that breaks through the helplessness and aloneness, and it reflects some of the world's love back at it, and makes it larger. And I know a lot of people are having that experience, like as bad as things get, that people, there's more and more people going out into the street. There's more and more people doing things together because we're obviously on such a dead end, so I don't know if that's a good answer.
Well, a question that I promise you we talked about it before we came into this room, and you would think that we would have resolved it or come to some conclusion, but I'm going to bring up the question again because I don't know the answer to this question, but I'm going to bring it up, which is what does writing do for us, or what can it do, or what does it do? What role does it play? What do we do with writing? What is it for in times of crisis? Or for you, for Ben.
I mean, I'm not going to answer it except to say that it's one of the questions that this book asks, because as I as I was trying to figure out some of these questions, I was more and more constantly aware of the ways in which writing is frequently an exploitative force in the world. So I was writing about various indigenous people, and often the only way to them for me, sitting by my computer, was through various anthropologists who wrote about them and who were also complicit in their destruction in various ways, sometimes quite directly, sometimes less directly. And so that one of the questions that the book tries to ask is is it possible to write without plundering, to write without theft, without being part of the destructive channels that are running through things. And the book, I think, is and all the writing that I do, I think, is an effort to find a way of writing that is freed from those dynamics of extraction. So for me, the important thing, I think, was more to pose that question than to try to answer it. But what about you?
Oh, I don't have an answer. Let me see. For me, I think I was really inspired by the notion that you presented towards the end of the book, that maybe writing can be found in nature, and it's not something that we recognize as writing. And it can be the algae, it can be the fungi, it can be a lot of different things, like that image of heating turtle shells and to see how they break and then learning something from that was very compelling to me. And maybe that's what poetry does. And I know we have some poets in the room, but I'm always in awe of the wisdom that can be found, or the level of inquiry that can be reached through poetry. And I don't know, I'm just sort of thinking out loud. And this is also a question that's open to you all, if you're interested in furthering that. We have about 15 minutes left.
Should we turn it over to, do people have questions?
We are happy to open the room for conversation, and if anyone has questions
We
or
have a
wants to chime in.
microphone for that. So, yeah. It's right here. So we have a question. You good?
Great. Hi. Am I live? Great. Thank you. My name's Tom McHenry, and I'm only halfway through your book, Ben, so apologies. And maybe you answered in the second half. But you said a moment ago that you're still thinking about what writing does, but I come at these issues, but I love the desert in much the same way, and I think some of the most wonderful things in your book are the sort of evocative descriptions of the desert landscape, and then how people went back and looked at it. But I'm curious, I'm a lawyer, as a lawyer and someone who cares about the protection of the desert and the role that law and regulation plays. I don't want to talk about the Trump administration very much, but what I'm interested in is your view of your role as a writer. I mean, Bill McKibben was one of the people who did the blurb on your book. Bill's a very active climate activist as well as an essayist, but in a different way, he's more of a reporter. You're, I think, in a way more spiritual or anthropological in your thinking. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that and the way that your writing contributes to or helps us understand these issues in the desert. Is that enough of a question?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that. It's a big question. I mean, I do a bunch of different kinds of writing, and some of it is more straightforwardly journalistic. I rarely, even in my journalism, do the kind of work which, hopefully this story will uncover some evil and people will be, moved to pass a law. Partly because, in my experience, that it doesn't often happen. It happens sometimes, and that's great. But for the most part, it doesn't happen. And if it doesn't happen, then like, what can you do, right? I mean, I write about, I've written a lot about Palestine, and I do not have the hope, and have really never had it, that my writing is going to awaken people's consciences, and they're going to call their congressman, and this will, we'll stop sending weapons over there, and that'll be done. I think I hope I can make people think, and maybe make them think about familiar things in new ways, and when I can't do that, I hope I can. There's a something I read in the introduction to the book I wrote about the West Bank, which I tried to express that, in many ways, the human world is made of stories. It's made of narratives. It's made of language, and a lot of it's awful. a lot of it's really, a lot of it's lies. A lot of it's malicious lies. And I do believe that in a way that has no reward, that trying to tell true stories changes the balance of the human cosmos, and which is it's a much more sort of modest goal, I think, but it's the only one that makes sense to me, because I think if I always wrote hoping this will I'll be able to right this wrong and fix this problem, I would go mad with despair, because it maybe doesn't happen.
Can I just add on that, Edward Abbey is someone who comes to mind, who wrote about it in maybe a more direct way in terms of things, but is there something about the desert that's special that inspires writers, or could it be any form of nature?
I mean, I think there's a lot that's special about the desert, but I think the desert inspires certain kinds of writers, maybe.
Does anyone else have a question?
Hi, so, thank you both. It's very deep. And there's also, part of me wants to find the simplicity and the essence underneath the cerebral discussion. So this gentleman used the word spiritual. Is that a comfortable word for either one of you? You've referenced that a loss of illusions can be very uncomfortable, and certainly can help lead us to despair. I think a number of people in this room can identify with that. But is there a greater value in losing the illusions in order to take us to a deeper place of spirit? And if so, how do you define spirit?
I'll try. Yeah, I don't feel uncomfortable with the word spiritual, and obviously there's many ways of interpreting that, but I think I am personally and creatively interested in transcendence and transcending the body. My stories often have bodies that are decaying or dying and ready to move on to another kind of understanding of existence. And that comes from like epiphanies that I've had over my lifetime, and I'm a little shy to share some of them, but I had like epiphanies when I was a teenager, and like I listened to like Alan Watts and started reading Buddhist texts when I was like 17 years old, and so I can't deny that all of that has shaped me in different ways, and I am interested in what knowledge and what solace we can find after the material world that we know is no longer. So I do write about death a lot. And I think that's one way that I can answer. And then another thing, one small thing that I can add to that, I think I write nonfiction. I've also dabbled in journalism throughout my career. But I think in fiction, I can explore the emotional, like an emotional terrain. I also use fiction to write about real terrain, like real places, but I feel like emotions and the way the emotions can be a kind of language that is hard and beautiful and a lot of different things. So I'm very interested in like the emotional is what I'm trying to say, and I think fiction, not to say that nonfiction doesn't do it, but just me personally, like fiction allows me to go there.
Yeah, I think I've been, like Carribean, I was a religious studies major in college. I lived in Joshua Tree. I'm okay with spiritualism. But I think I'm a person who's alive right now, and I'm interested in this particular conjuncture, this particular material conjuncture.
In this moment in time.
Yeah.
Can you contribute to that?
What can I contribute to that?
I mean, is that part of what you're processing there? Is what you're writing? How you're contributing?
I hope so.
Hello, I'm Jeremy. I'm one of Caribbean students at California Institute of the Arts and at CLI-FI, or at least trying to be at Wesley Wright's CLI-FI. And I kind of had a question, I think, sort of along this idea of spirituality and like hope or not hope, and kind of versus like the apocalypse kind of as its either end or idea of unfurling. Is that, I guess I put it, so now is an apocalypse. What does rebirth look like? Sorry.
I'm afraid we're going to find out.
I don't have an answer, but I use fiction to help me think through like hard questions like that. And I wrote a story not long ago, and it's sort of imagining the San Gabriel Valley, especially like the Whittier Narrows area that I'm very connected to personally, in the sort of like post-apocalypses and what that looks like. And I was trying to imagine like which humans survive, like who gets to survive. And in this story, the humans that survive are the ones that are able to sort of shift into the bodies of animals. And my main character survived because they were able to sort of take in the body, like move into the body of birds, and learn the terrain, and it becomes like a survival strategy. So I think what I'm getting at is I'm thinking about how to like decentralize like humans. Like we're so like centered on ourselves, and so what would happen if you learned from the way a bird lives or the way a plant lives or something, like the way they survive, right? And I think I'm thinking a lot about the creosote in your book and about how it survives in the desert and how it really makes you think about time differently because they can be so ancient, right? And so I think in the desert, and every environment has its own way of like of living time, and I think the creosote does that. But again, that I think we can learn from the creosote, we can learn from birds, we can learn from fungus, we can learn from fungus is hella smart. I just keep talking.
Yeah, absolutely. I think like one of the things that I was trying to figure out in this book, and I'm trying to figure out in the book I'm working on now, is how did it happen that that humans would, and this is something that happened historically very, very recently, and by recently I mean in the last 300 years, would begin to understand only humans to be possessed with life in a meaningful sense, to have it with spirits, with consciousness, and to regard all of the rest of existence as sort of spiritually dead, which is like the modern technological way of understanding the world. And I think like that's got to go. And I think like it is. There's like a very strong like. It's possible to say that in like, and a lot of people are saying this in various different ways, in all kinds of literature, both cli-fi and sci-fi and other kinds of fiction, but also in various nonfiction forms in the last few years, that there is some part of us as a species, is seeing how important it is that we understand like our like embeddedness in a world in which we're deeply interrelated to other species, some of which we can't even see.
We have time for 2 more questions. Anybody else?
I have a rambling question thought, which is just maybe to connect some of the things that have come up, which is also, I think, one of the things I appreciate about both of your writing is the connection to place. And I was thinking about that in some ways, I think this is true for myself, and I'm wondering if it's true for you, that this connection to what might be called spirit is also embedded in places, and that how you think about that, and that maybe that's also connected to the climate question. So that's just a kind of open-ended lob back to you all. But I think that in my own experience of like when I find spirit is often in a place. It feels like it's in a particular location.
Yeah, I mean, I think when I moved out of Joshua Tree, where I didn't live there that long. I lived there like 2 years. Although I'd been going there and spending months at a time there for a long time before that. But like, and I moved there because I felt this incredible like freedom there, which I wouldn't hesitate to call like a spiritual freedom, because I felt like this real intimate power in the land, and it was evident every time you walked outside. And you can feel that in Los Angeles, in the San Diego Valley. There's just a lot of distractions here, and there's a lot of noise. When I left Joshua Tree and moved to the city where I live now, for the first couple of years, I felt kind of like bereft. because I didn't feel that sort of connectedness to a larger kind of time. I didn't feel that kind of connectedness to sort of interdimensional connectedness that was kind of the substance of life there. And it changed when I had a kid. Like having a child and feeling suddenly like projected into the past and into all of my ancestors and projected into the future through all of my kids' ancestors. I was suddenly like I've placed again. So place doesn't always have to mean a physical place.
Yeah, I'll be brief because I could talk all day about El Monte and South El Monte, and I actually have a whole book about El Monte and South El Monte. But I feel, as I've mentioned before, like very invested in that place, like emotionally, and like if I had money, I would pour money into that place as well. But that place has a kind of sadness to it, and it's something that I thought was just something I experienced as like a kid growing up there in the 80s and 90s. Like the 80s and 90s were a rough time as well. There's a lot of reasons to be sad. But there's other writers that have come out of El Monte, and I will always rep Salvador Plasencia, who wrote People of Paper, and Michael Jaime Becerra, who wrote many books, including Every Night is Ladies' Night. They're about El Monte, and we write sad things. And it's as I've become more and more and more and more endlessly rooted into that place, I've learned more and more and more about the histories of that place. And it's a history of violence that's really literally embedded in the land. There are stories of indigenous people being assassinated, of like mestizos being, like it's a violent history and a violent story of place. And I think in some places, like in El Monte, like it's palpable, you can feel it. And so I think I'm not one to shy away from those emotions. I don't know, I think maybe, I don't know, it's part of like this whole like gothy like thing that I'm attracted to. But yeah, and I feel like I always want to go back to that, and I felt that same like kind of history, but different as well in the Central Valley and in Fresno in particular. I felt like there was a lot of resonance between El Monte and Fresno. But yeah, I feel like the land itself can be, and it doesn't usually take too much digging if you just kind of commit yourself to learning about the history of a place. You'll quickly find that a lot of emotional charge and like actual violence also, and of course beauty, but beauty is one thing, but there's also other range, there's other emotions and like other things that one can experience. And I think that's one of the things, it's not a pretty lesson necessarily that I teach my children, but they ask me, why do you write these spooky stories? And I tell them, well, I don't know if I'm communicating it exactly in these words, but what I'm trying to convey to them is that life is all of these things, right? There's like sad things and angry things, and there's like enlightening, inspiring, like wildly gorgeous things. There's all of these things, and that's all part of being alive. And that's okay, you know, and so I hope that will allow them to be able to experience those things fully, and then also discerningly.
I have a wrap-up question. Are you journaling? Are either of you journaling and keeping diaries? Because I think of a healing exercise for all of us here is to try to write. And I'm just wondering if healing and journaling for you, does journaling help heal you, and are you doing that while you're writing your other materials? Either one.
I'm not right now. I periodically do. I haven't for a few years. But recently I haven't had time.
I still kind of keep a journal, but it's like jammed with to-do lists and like just like reminders and then like really like emotional little bits that I just sort of spurred out between lesson plans and picking up my kids from school, and it's just like a mishmash of things. But throughout my life, I've been like a hardcore journalist. It just looks different now. I mean, I started journaling as soon as I could write. I still have my first journal at my mom's house, and it was an important part of my journey as a writer. It's just that now things are complicated, you know, but so it just looks different now.
And Ben, can you tell us anything else about your future work product that you're working on?
I will if Carribean does.
Okay. Yes,
Yeah, I mean, well, I do have a book of sort of short semi-fiction, which will probably come out before the book I'm working on now. That'll be with City Lights in probably the spring of next year. But the book I've been working on for a long time that I alluded to earlier is a more straightforward historical attempt to answer some of these same questions about the why it is that some human beings, because it wasn't humanity as a whole, but it was actually a very small sector of humanity, began to, and like hint, it came from Europe, began to relate to the Earth and other human beings in a fairly radically new way, and in a far more destructive way than other humans had before. And it's like intimately tied up with the histories of colonialism and capitalism as well. So that's what I'm doing. It's I hope that I'll finish it soon.
Yeah, I have a novel that I've talked about before. If you know me, I've talked about it a bunch of times because it's taken me a really long time to finish, but it's just a novel and it takes place in a surprise in South El Monte and specifically in the Whittier Narrows, and it was inspired by real events, young activists that were really trying to protect our natural space. And this happened years ago, but then that inspired like a whole fictional story for me that I hope to finish in the next few months. I hope.
Thank you to both of you. We have really enjoyed this. Thank you so much. We're gonna find a place. I think if you'll stay put, we can have people who've bought books and ask you to sign them. So maybe the best thing is if you just stay right where you are, and we'll bring maybe a little table up there. But let me work on that.